right, folks, ready for a deep dive today? We're going to jump right into something that's super relevant for those of you prepping for the UPSC, something I know a lot of you are interested in.
Absolutely.
We're talking about the greening of the Loess Plateau in China. And this is a prime example of environmental policy in action, sustainable development, all that good stuff that we need to wrap our heads around. And who knows, maybe even something for prelims in here as well.
Yeah, I think what makes this case study particularly interesting for UPSC aspirants is that it really highlights, I think, the complexity of environmental policy making.
Right.
Because the Loess Plateau, for a long time, was sort of the poster child for, human-induced environmental degradation.
Okay, so set the stage for us. Like, what was going on in the Loess Plateau before this huge greening project?
So imagine this. A vast region in China, known for its fertile soil, right? Crucial for agriculture, livelihoods of millions. But by the late 20th century, overgrazing, overcultivation, they had essentially transformed this once thriving land into what was dubbed the most eroded place on Earth.
Oh, wow.
We're talking severe erosion, leading to intense dust storms that reached major cities like Beijing, even impacting air quality, public health, you name it.
Yeah, so it's not like environmental damage is just contained, right? Like, it ripples out.
Exactly. And that's, I think, one of the key takeaways here is that, you can't just contain it to one area, and then when you layer on top of that the socioeconomic implications, we're talking about a region that's home to over 100 million people who depend on this land for their survival.
So this is like hitting on that population and development chapter in the UPSC syllabus.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. Like environmental degradation, it's not just about, trees and animals. It's really about people.
Yeah.
It's about livelihood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, the Yellow River, a crucial water source for the region,
was choked with silt from the erosion.
Wow.
This had cascading effects on water resources, on agriculture, the entire ecosystem, really.
Okay, so the Chinese government is facing this multi-pronged crisis.
Yep.
So what do? Do they try to slowly implement things, or did they go big?
They went big.
Okay.
In 1999, they launched the Grain to Green Project, a massive undertaking backed by the World Bank.
Okay.
And the scale of this project is mind-boggling. They set out to convert over 11,500 square miles of cropland.
Wow.
Think about that, an area larger than many countries.
That is huge.
Into forest and grassland.
Wow. Okay.
So
what were the specific methods they used? Like, that's going to be a pretty multi-pronged approach, right?
They banned unsustainable farming practices like overgrazing.
Okay.
Promoted large-scale tree planting. They even provided financial incentives to farmers.
Oh, interesting.
To transition to more sustainable agricultural methods.
So really restructuring kind of the entire agricultural system there.
Yes. It sounds a little bit like that top-down policy implementation that China's known for being able to do, and the scale of what they can achieve.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the interesting things that this case study brings up is, thinking about the pros and cons of different governance models. Right?
Yeah.
So does a more centralized system allow for this sort of rapid action?
Right.
Are there trade-offs in terms of, democratic participation, local knowledge? This kind of nuanced analysis, I think, is really what the UPSC exam is all about.
This is why I love doing this, right? It's not just about rote memorization.
Right.
It's like, how do you think about these things?
Exactly.
So, okay, they do this big project. What are the early outcomes?
Well, the early results were actually quite promising.
Go ahead.
Vegetation cover increased significantly.
Okay.
Soil erosion rates decreased.
Good.
There were even reports of wildlife returning to the region.
Oh.
There's a really interesting anecdote in the source material about a forestry worker who witnessed the return of birdsong.
Oh, that's lovely.
And a revitalized ecosystem.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the incredible resilience of nature when given a chance to recover.
That's encouraging.
It is, but of course.
But I'm sure it wasn't all, roses and sunshine.
No, not at all.
What were some of the challenges?
Well, I think, for many farmers, this meant giving up their land,
right,
giving up their traditional ways of life.
Yeah.
And there's a really powerful quote from a farmer in the source material. He said, what about the next generation? they can't eat trees.
Right.
And it really highlights, I think, that tension between environmental goals and the economic realities of local communities.
It's that balance, right?
It is.
Like, it can't just be about planting trees.
No.
It's got to be about, like, how do people live? How do they survive?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a key aspect of sustainable development that we have to always keep in mind.
Totally.
Yeah, that quote really sticks with you, right?
Yeah.
When you think about sustainable development, it can't just be this abstract idea, right?
Right.
It has to have that human element.
Yeah, like we were talking about, the people, the planet, the profit.
Exactly.
That triple bottom line.
Yeah, and I think this case study really, again, brings us back to those UPSC syllabus topics.
Right.
Sustainable development, inclusive growth,
Right.
Because ultimately, environmental policies, they have to be socially just.
Right.
They have to be economically viable.
Yeah.
If you want them to work in the long run.
Yeah, for sure.
And, in the early years of this project, there was a noticeable dip in grain production.
Oh, interesting.
And that raised concerns, of course, about food security.
Yeah, especially in a country as populous as China.
Exactly.
Right, so how do you balance that, right?
Right, yeah. And it led to some debates, about, like, is this project actually viable?
Mm-hmm.
Can we actually afford to do this?
Right, so is that tension, right, between, like, we need to protect the environment,
right,
but we also need to feed people.
Exactly.
And that's something we grapple with here in India as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So did they just abandon the project? Like, were they like, okay, well, we tried.
No, they didn't abandon it, but they adapted.
Okay, so what did they do?
Well, the initial reforestation efforts, while well-intentioned, had focused primarily on these monoculture plantations.
Okay.
Right? So planting vast areas with a single tree species.
Yeah.
Which, on the surface seems like, okay, well, you're getting a lot of trees in the ground really quickly.
Yeah, green.
Right, vegetation cover.
Right.
But the drawback, of course, is a lack of biodiversity. Right, and that's a problem.
Yeah, and those monoculture plantations, they're much more vulnerable to pests, diseases, even climate change.
Right.
So it's not a sustainable solution in the long term.
So it's not just about, like, having lots of different pretty trees.
Right.
It's actually about the function of the ecosystem.
Exactly.
And did they realize this?
They did. And I think that's another really important lesson here for UPSC aspirants.
Okay.
Is that, this adaptive management approach is really crucial.
Okay.
Right? You have to be flexible. You have to be willing to learn.
Right. And course correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So they didn't just stubbornly stick to the original plan.
Right.
They said, okay, well, we're seeing these problems. We need to incorporate native tree species, promote biodiversity, create a more resilient, ecologically balanced ecosystem.
So it's like they were moving away from that one-size-fits-all to something more tailored to what was actually going on, right? Yeah. Thinking about sustainability in a more holistic way.
Right. And what about the economic concerns of those farmers?
Yeah, so that's another crucial part of this, right?
Right.
Alongside the shift toward those more ecologically sound reforestation methods, the project also encouraged a transition to more sustainable farming practices.
Oh, interesting.
So things like terracing, right, to prevent soil erosion, crop rotation, enhance soil fertility, water harvesting methods, really trying to optimize water use.
Yeah.
And these practices, while maybe not immediately boosting yields, to the level that they were before, they contributed to that long-term food security and really enhanced the economic resilience of those farmers.
So again, it's back to that idea, right? Sustainable development can't just be about protecting the environment.
No.
It's got to be about how do we make sure people are okay?
Exactly.
Like the planet and the people.
Yeah, it's finding those win-win solutions, right?
Yeah.
Where both people and the planet benefit.
So do you think they found that, like, did they really find that balance?
I mean, it's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah.
The Loess Plateau Project is still evolving.
Right.
But I think the progress is undeniable.
Yeah.
Erosion rates are down.
Okay.
Air quality has improved.
Good.
The ecosystem is showing clear signs of recovery.
Yeah, that's great.
So, is it a perfect solution?
Right.
Probably not.
Yeah.
But it shows that large-scale ecological restoration,
it
is possible when you couple it with that focus on, social and economic well-being.
Yeah, it's really interesting how, again, it's that interconnectedness, right? You can't just pull out the environment.
We can't isolate.
It's all kind of tied together.
Exact.
But then there's this other, like, big thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That we have to think about, and that's climate change.
Climate change, absolutely.
How did that play into all of this?
Yeah. Yeah, because the Loess Plateau, like so many other regions around the world, is already experiencing the impacts of climate change.
Yeah.
Shifting rainfall patterns, increased frequency of extreme weather events,
Okay.
rising temperatures.
Right.
So it's added this whole other layer of complexity.
Yeah, so it's not just about, like, restoring it to what it was, like, 50 years ago.
Exactly. You can't just go back in time.
Right. It's like, how do we make it work for the future?
Yeah, it's about creating a system that can adapt, that can thrive in a future that is likely to be very different
Right.
than the past.
Yeah.
So they've had to embrace a much more forward-looking approach,
Right.
anticipating those future challenges,
Okay.
incorporating climate change adaptation strategies into their plans.
So what does that look like? What are some examples?
Well, promoting drought-resistant species,
Oh,
implementing water conservation measures,
right.
and really, fostering greater community participation in managing this landscape, because ultimately it's the people who live there who are going to be most impacted
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
by these changes.
I mean, this has been such a fascinating look into this greening of the Loess Plateau.
It really has.
I feel like it just brings up so many important things, especially if you're thinking about the UPSC.
Yeah.
We're talking environmental policy, sustainable development. How do you balance all these different factors?
Yeah, I think it really underscores the importance of a holistic approach, right? You can't just look at environmental issues in isolation.
Right.
You have to think about, how does this connect to social well-being?
Yeah.
How does it connect to economic development?
Yeah, you can't just pick one.
Yeah, you can't.
Yeah.
You have to find those synergistic solutions.
Yeah, where everybody wins.
Exactly.
And it's really interesting how, this project, it really shows how important it is to think long-term.
Yeah, long-term vision is crucial.
Especially with something like this.
Absolutely.
It wasn't just about, like, let's plant some trees and everything will be fine.
No quick fixes.
It's really about changing, like, the fundamental relationship between people and the land.
Exactly. Shifting mindsets,
Yeah.
changing practices,
Nice.
and really fostering that sense of shared responsibility.
Right. So it's not just the government saying, like, you must do this.
No, it has to be a collaborative effort.
It's like we all have to kind of buy into this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that requires a deep understanding of the local context,
Right.
community engagement.
Yeah.
And honestly, a willingness to learn and adapt as you go along.
So UPSC aspirants, I feel like there's so much to learn from this Loess Plateau project.
Absolutely.
It gives you a way to think about environmental challenges.
Yeah.
How do you craft effective policies?
Mm-hmm.
And I think, just understanding all those nuances of sustainable development.
Yeah, and it shows you, that you can actually make a difference, that it's possible to restore ecosystems.
Right. Yeah, even on a huge scale.
Even on a massive scale. And that's, it's a hopeful message, I think.
It is hopeful. It is hopeful, but of course it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of coordination.
Absolutely.
I mean, so before we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with kind of a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
Thinking about, you're a future policymaker.
Mm-hmm.
What can we learn from this Loess Plateau project here in India?
Yeah, that's the key question, right?
We've got our own environmental issues that we're dealing with.
You do.
So how do we take those lessons, the successes,
Yeah.
the challenges, the long-term vision, and apply that to, our own unique context?
Exactly. Because India faces, a unique set of challenges and opportunities.
Right. So much to think about.
It is.
And that's what we like to do here on the Deep Dive. Right? Get you thinking.
Get those brains working.
So if you enjoyed this conversation, make sure you hit that like button.
Yeah, show some love.
Subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep doing these deep dives.
Absolutely.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts. So leave a comment down below.
Yeah, tell us what you're thinking.
What did you learn from this Loess Plateau project? How do you think it applies to India?
Yeah, what are those key takeaways?
And, of course, a big shout out to The Guardian.
Yes.
Their reporting on this was fantastic. Gave us so much to talk about today.
Yeah, really insightful.
So as you continue on your UPSC journey, keep the Loess Plateau in mind.
It's a great example.
It's a great example of what we can achieve.
Of human ingenuity.
Right, when we work together.
The power of collective action.
And, learning from our mistakes.
Absolutely, because we're going to make mistakes along the way.
We are, but that's okay.
That's part of the process.
It's all about learning.
It is.
So until next time, keep those brains buzzing and stay curious.
I'll see you soon.